Hey, Brent Ryerson here. We're out in the shop today and we're working on the build for Bampas house in Corning, New York, which is a charity. And it's made out of some beautiful slabs of black walnut. And as you can see, I've already got the framework set up. This is actually hot glued down to this laminate type plywood material. And I've already done the first pour. The reason I didn't capture that on video was I wasn't sure if the hot glue was going to hold or not. The last few times I've been using a silicone. Today we're going to do another pour using our premium resin here. It's a two-part epoxy. We're going to measure it carefully, mix it up until it's clear. It takes about 5 minutes. Then we're going to add some pigment. There's actually a blue mica that we'll be adding, as well as a blue glow in the dark, so that when this bowl is turned and it's complete in the customer's home, if it's gotten enough light for the day, it should actually have a nice, beautiful blue glow. So I'm looking forward to the build. I hope it doesn't tear out bad, and when we get it on the lathe, I'm going to have to be able to sharpen my tools and sharpen my skills, but it's going to be a great project, and I'm looking forward to giving to the charity. All right, so now our mixture has gone from cloudy to clear again, and I've just started to add some of the blue glow-in-the-dark pigment. And I will stir that in till I can tell all the chunks are out, make sure I get enough of it in there, and then I'll add the mica. The mica has actually got a metallic kind of property to it, and I want to make sure that I've got this glow-in-the-dark stuff dissolved as possible in here. Once that's done, we're going to pour it right in here. Any air bubbles that come up, we've got a torch here and we'll take them right out. All right, after a few more minutes of stirring, I've added the mica and the glow. We're just going to go ahead and pour this right into the form very carefully. One of the things I have learned along the way is before you do the pours, if you can seal the edges of the wood, in this case the live edges that are facing one another, you're much less likely to create air bubbles, which are basically the enemy of a project like this. It makes it look much less attractive. So we're going to pour this in here slowly, and then we can actually take the stir stick and stir this pigment, stir this epoxy, and give it some different types of designs as it hardens and dries. Depending on what you want it to look like. In this case, I'd like it to look kind of like a stirred type view. So I'm going to let all of that go in there. Give that a second to sit because we can probably get a little more out of there. And you can come back and actually do some swirls in the material, and it creates a really cool effect. I really like the way that looks. I'm a little concerned at this point. I may have added a little more of the blue mica than I would have liked, and it may make the glow feature a little bit less prevalent. I did hit it with a UV flashlight while it was actually in that cup, and I was able to confirm it does glow. However, it is not a very prominent glow. You can see some of the bubbles have formed on the surface here, and I'm just going to take this torch and hit those bubbles, and they're going to go right away. They do come back a little bit. Sometimes you got to go over it a few times, but usually you can give it a minute or two. You don't want to keep the flame in any one place for too long. It will burn. So you've got to be a little careful there. But other than that, you can use the torch. It smooths it out, makes it look great. Obviously, in this case, we're going to need another pour setup, so I will be doing that on another day. All right, we've made a lot of progress since the last video. I've actually even done a couple of sample bowls. This one's a piece of ash and walnut that I glued together. I actually used a torch to bring this grain out a little bit more. And the first bowl I did was actually a small pine bowl that chipped out pretty bad. But it gave me good practice at getting the curves. Actually, I really like the way the grain turned out in this one. But you can see we've already put the build for the charity up on the wheel. I'm already covered in all of the dust and debris. And I actually ended up buying a new tool to help carve this, because the tools that I have today, I need to learn how to better sharpen. And this one comes with a carbide tip that allows me to have a much sharper edge for a longer period. And that's super important here because we can't allow anything to chip out the wood as this square spins. This thing sounds like a fan as it goes around. You've got to be really careful with your knuckles. But it's been a fun project. I'm going to do just a little bit of carving here for the camera. It's a very similar process throughout. But basically what I'm going to be doing is passing this tool back and forth, just taking off a little bit of wood at a time. It's going to come off in flakes and in strings where the plastic is. But this is about an hour and a half in because I'm going very slow, learning a new tool, and trying not to get any tear out. So I'm going to demonstrate for just a few minutes and then we'll cut the clip. So that's how the process works. Right now the lathe is spinning on its slowest speed. Unfortunately on this lathe that's about 1100 RPM. Some of the nicer lathes have a variable speed feature on them. It allows them to go down to even just a couple hundred RPM. But this unit has been great for me, but doesn't have a lot of features. So there's several more hours of work to be done here. This is actually the bottom side of the bowl. May be difficult to tell from there. But you can see the square shape still here, and we're just trying to carve out that underneath so that you get that profile when you look at it from the side. Thought I'd take a quick video of an up-close view of how this works so you can see kind of how the process goes and maybe get a little better view of the way the tool is moving on the surface and how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick video there. Barely making contact with the surface. It's going very, very slowly. You can see some really fine shavings come off there. That's a good sign. That means your tool is very sharp. The last thing you want to catch, so you've got to be very careful with the angle and the amount of pressure you're putting on it. Go slow, smooth. Right now I'm just trying to make this feature a little bit deeper so that it really helps bring some of that grain forward even more. I'll put it off so you can kind of see what we're working on. So right now I'm just trying to get this detail a little bit deeper. I'm going to want this whole portion of the bowl to look like it's starting to fold over when we flip it to the other side. So I need to get this groove in there a little deeper so we can get some more of that movement from the top side. I'm just going to continue to shape the bottom of this bowl, and then eventually we'll flip it, work on carving out the inside. All right, now that we have gotten the bowl detail on the bottom complete, we're going to take a block and we're going to sand the bottom of this a little bit. Just make sure it gets good and flat. We're going to need that perfectly flat and smooth for when we flip it over to dig out the front side. And then we're also going to take and sand all of the remainder of the bottom because this will be the easiest time to have that mounted in such a way that you can get to this back side. We'll get that smooth. Typically I like to get more of these lines out before I sand, but with the concern regarding tear out, which we have minimized here thankfully, I'm going to sand the remainder of the detail into the bottom. A little bit different than I normally would. Again, normally I would spend a little more time with the tools to dig it out, but in this case I think sanding is going to be a lot safer. And I'm going to go ahead and start with that block, and then I'll come in with a pneumatic drill. Got a 80 grit on a pneumatic drill here. We're just going to go over some of that, and then we're going to start into the curves, which is a little dangerous. It may rip my paper off. We're going to want to just try to make contact with the surface a little bit. Caught it there on the edge. We're going to keep trying to use this, but we'll see. It's probably going to rip it off now. See what that looks like now. Leaving just the smallest amount of tip left on the corners there, because I don't want to end up with a shorter bowl than I had intended. I want to keep that same thickness. Looks like we've taken a lot of the tool marks out. Probably still need to work on the shape just a little bit. I can feel some ridges in here. So we'll do a little bit more with the 80 grit and take another look in a second. Still got some ridges to go. Just a little bit more, I think, with this coarse grit, and we'll start moving down to some of the finer grits to make it even smoother. looking pretty consistent now. So I'm going to go ahead and change over to a finer grit and basically repeat that process down till we get to about a 300 grit paper, and that should be good and smooth. And then we'll have to mount something so we can turn this around and continue with the shaping on the front. You can see now that there's a lot more detail that's been sanded out. It's nice and smooth, it's looking good. I've also hot glued this knob on here, and that is going to allow me to mount it on this chuck when I take it off, and then I can flip the bowl around the other way so that we can begin carving out the top side. So I'm going to go ahead and take this apart now and show you how that looks. So the reason we glue this knob on is while it's still on the lathe and spinning, you can mount that, you can round it off, and it should find the exact center of the bowl as it's spinning. So we're going to take this backer plate off. It's just screwed on. And it's screwed into where the face would be, but it's screwed in a location where we're going to carve it out, so you're not going to see these holes. And I've got pretty short screws here. They're only about 3/4 of an inch. I wasn't sure how well they would hold. They were screwed directly into epoxy in most of these locations on the front of the bowl here. So I was very pleased that this block did not fly off at high speed like the last one did. That is why you do samples before you move on to a final product. So we're going to screw this chuck onto the lathe. And then we're going to place this in there. You can see I've actually put a groove in it. The groove is to help these metal grooves on the chuck hold it in place so that it won't come loose on me. And we're going to make sure it's good and flat in there best we can before we tighten it. Make sure something feels a little off there. I want to make sure we don't have anything in behind it. Okay. After a few minutes of monkeying with it, I've gotten it on here square. I've set my guard up so I can see how far off it is from square. It appears to be pretty close. We'll find out when we get a chisel on it. But now what we're going to do is start digging out the center of the bowl. We're going to carve out the center, and then we're going to start bringing these edges down. So it's going to look like that folded kind of piece of paper draping over a bowl, which is the look we're going for. So I will take another video when it's time to show you a little bit of the shaping going on. Alright, now I'm going to mark where I want the high point of the bowl to be. And really I want to kind of match that up from the back side where it goes up the highest, because I'm going to try to keep a consistent thickness throughout the bowl. So I'm going to turn the lathe on and we'll mark where that high point needs to be. Now I'll know where to carve in for the inside of the bowl and where I can begin to carve out on the outside of the bowl. And it looks like we've got a little unevenness here that I'm going to have to take it out and make sure I account for that with a pencil. But other than that, we're looking pretty good. We're going to use a drill press style chuck to drill partially into the bowl using our tailstock. And that saves some time from having to go back and forth as frequently, because basically all you have to do is turn on the lathe, and then we're going to use this device to push our fastener bit into the hole, and that'll be a great place for us to start or end our cuts. Probably end, since we want to be cutting downhill. So that's the process. We just want to be really careful about our depth. Right now we're going roughly the depth of the Foster bit here, so we have a lot of room to go still. After that, you're going to want to make sure you're either measuring your depth or you're just watching very carefully. Started to carve out the center. We've already drilled our hole here with the Foster bit. Now we're taking a bowl gouge, and I'm basically just cutting down into this void each time. And we're going to do that until we get way out to this line, and then we're going to work the opposite direction outward so that we get that flop over. Pressing a lot harder now than I was earlier because we're just roughing in the shape, and we don't have that same tear out concern like we did earlier. You can see we get some nice long strands in the resin as it's cutting. Again, that's a good indication your tool is pretty sharp. I don't consider myself to be an expert at sharpening these. In fact, I have a lot to learn. And that's basically the process. We're going to do that until the shape is roughly where we want it, and then we'll come back with the new tool that's kind of the finishing scraper. You can see we've got a lot of the front already completed. I'm at the point now where I'm using my detail tool to just do some scraping. I'm going to do a little bit more shaping with this tool. Maybe hard to see on the camera, but there is some chips that have come out of both the epoxy portion, and there's been some chatter across it on the side here. We're going to try to get all of that out with the tool the best we can before we switch over and do the sanding. Very similar method to what we did on the back side. And so I'm going to do just a little bit for the camera on the front, and then we'll move on to sanding. Looks like we've gotten most of the tear out or the chunks out of the resin portion already. I still have a decent amount of depth I'm going to dig out of the center of this bowl still. The outside is pretty much complete except for the sanding, but I'm going to cut the video there so I don't bore you with all the details. So most of the heavy sanding is done now. We started with an 80 grit using our pneumatic drill. Then we followed that by 120, 180, and then a 220. And then I've been using this 280 grit. There are just a few scratches remaining that we're going to try to take out. And then along these outsides, I found it's easiest to just go ahead and sand with the grain. And that helps take out some of those circular scratches from where it's been turned. Also, it's obviously very difficult to sand the outside of this while it's spinning because it wants to knock the sandpaper out of your hand or rip it off of that drill. So that's why I end up kind of hand sanding this last part. Once we're done with this, we're just going to put a finish on there, and then we're going to need to take it off of the lathe. All the fine sanding is done now, so we'll be taking some finish, and I like to use this Minwax wipe-on poly for bowls, and we're just going to apply that to the front and the back. We'll be just doing the front right now. Once I separate the back from that knob that we had glued on, I'll do the back side after some more sanding. So let's see what that looks like. It's really going to pull that grain out as it goes on. You can see it's going to darken that wood a lot. And this is where you can really tell how well a project like this has been sanded as that kind of gloss finish comes through. One of the areas it's going to make the biggest impact is in that light wood area because it's going to turn it more of a yellow than a white, which is good and bad, depends on how you see it. it'll have it match a little more closely now. You can see kind of to the rest of the coloring in the bowl, but still provides a very pretty contrast there. Also, you can see on the resin portion, the epoxy resin portion, you can start to see a lot of that swirling that I had put into it, and you can really start to see through it a lot better now. It's not nearly as hazy. And so we'll do a couple coats of this. We'll apply this first coat here real well, make sure we get everything. We'll give it an hour or so to dry, and we'll apply a second coat. This first one's going to soak in pretty quickly, but I wanted to capture that on camera so you can see that transformation. To me, it's one of the most interesting parts of the build.